Well, I think I'm ready to get this stumpy baby carrier finished up. Now you can see that in the time between the last video and this video, I've put on a few decals, just a few of them. And I did some initial chipping on the decals. I just used my hobby knife actually and just scraped away a little bit of the decal, made it look a little weathered. In a few areas where I scraped away down to the plastic, I didn't worry about it because I knew I was going to be going back in with some paint. So I've just got those areas established. The reason I do this rather than just paint the chipping on is because that actually removes some of the decal and the paint will be down at, I guess you'd say, a lower level. Yeah, and that's going to be microscopically. But I think it'll just make a little nicer pattern to it. That's the theory. That's what I'm going to stick with. It sounds good on video. But this video is going to be all about doing some panel lining, some chipping, and then streaking and fluid and earth effects and all that stuff. Just a quick pass through on all of those things to just finish it up, to make the armor look a little beat up and get it ready to get on a base and be finished. Now, one thing that is going to be a little different is I'm going to be trying out something that a company kindly sent me at no charge. A company named BenQ got in touch with me to try out their BenQ eReading lamp. And it's this one right here. And they just basically said, hey, would like to send you this to give it a try to see what you think. And so let me turn that on and get a little extra light on the subject. Yeah, I like that. So it kind of helps me light up the front of my desk. And so far I've been using it off camera a little bit and I really like it. So I'm just going to use it throughout this video. And then at the end, I'll let you know what my analysis of it is. Now, there aren't a whole lot of panel lines and rivet details on this model, but for what there is, I'm going to be using this Vallejo Game Wash Umber Wash. Now, the reason I'm using an umber wash, a brown wash, this would be kind of like Citadel's Agrax Earthshade or something like that. The reason I'm using this is I want the model to appear dirty. So brown is going to help sell that notion, and I'm going to carefully line these in with this liner brush. Now, if you were trying to make a model that was more clean in appearance, I'd recommend that you use something like a black wash from the Game Wash line, or Citadel's non-oil or something like that. You could also use oils and enamels. They work very well also. I just prefer the acrylic product because of the drying time. So let me take a few minutes and go around the rest of the model and get this lined in, and then we'll move on. All right, the panel lining is done, so I'm going to grab some Administratum Gray, which is a very light gray color. I'm going to use this to start the light color of chipping. Now, the reason I'm using Administratum Gray and not something like Rust Gray, which has a little more blue to it, is while quite often the bluish, a lighter blue would be used here to represent lower surface level scratches, I think a light blue in this case would be a little too bright. So I think a light gray is going to work a little better, and thus the choice of Administratum Gray. If you were using, say, Vallejo, you could use Vallejo Sky Gray. That's about the same color, but it's just a stylistic choice, really. And then I'm using this 20 or 00, depending on which numbering you're used to seeing, liner brush to just do this in. I could do sponge chipping here, but because the parts are so small and I want to try and keep it in scale, that I'm going to go with brush chipping. It doesn't take very long at all. And you see I'm just getting a little bit on the end of my brush. I'm starting off doing just very surface level edge chips and things like that. And then once I get those in there, then I can go to places like where this damage is right here and develop areas of larger chipping. Now, another reason that this chipping color will work well is because I'm going to come back later with a darker chipping color and it will provide some contrast. One other point about chipping like this is it provides some edge highlighting. So if you choose not to do any edge highlighting early on in the process, then you could have done like I did and knew you were going to, at this point of the build, use a very light colored chipping. And this provides some edge highlighting. All right, I've got the area of light gray chipping done, and you'll notice that there's a few areas where I added a fairly large amount of paint. Those were areas that I knew that I was going to go back and put some of the darker chipping into, so I kind of pre-planned for those. Now I'm still going to put a little bit of the darker chipping into some of the smaller areas, but most of it is going to be reserved for just a few larger areas. Now, the reason I'm going to go with a darker gray color is I'm imagining this to be chipping that goes down to the underlying material. And I'm imagining the material to be some form of composite. What that composite is, because remember, this is in the 41st century and it's a long way in the future and all of that stuff. So I'm not too worried about what it is, just that, well, it's a composite, and composites are quite often a dark gray color. So I'm going to go with that dark gray. Now, if you were wanting this to represent something that was a more ferrous metallic underlying material, and you wanted to develop some rust tones, then you'd probably want to use a darker brown or something like that. But I'm not going to be doing a lot of rust tones on this, maybe some, but I want to just develop the notion that it's a composite underneath. Now the color I've chosen for this is Vallejo Dark Gray. I wanted to use this, one, because I wanted a dark gray, not a pure black. But two, this one has just the slightest hint of bluishness to it. So I thought it would work well with the rest of the armor. Now I've thinned the paint down with just a little bit of water, and I'm just going to use this same liner brush and just begin going in and developing the darker areas of chipping here, generally leaving some of the gray poking through around the edges. You don't have to do that. Sometimes I'll do it on this one, sometimes I'll make chips that are just the dark gray alone, because that can happen. Something could gouge it or hit it or whatever that would go right down to the underlying material. And then some of these areas I'll just bounce my brush along like I did with the light gray and add some darker chipping there. But it's basically the same process as I followed before, just a little more restrained and a little more confined. Now, the question I'm asked a lot is, how much is too much chipping? And the basic answer I always give to that is, it's your choice. If you think that it's going to have lots and lots and lots of chips and you think that looks cool, put lots and lots of chips on it and don't worry about what somebody says. If somebody says it's over chipped, and they go, no, not on that day, that's exactly how much chipping it had. So it's your model. Do what you think looks cool. That's what I do. I want to take some steps to make the armor look like the paint has faded, that it's aged, that it's worn, that it's just old. So what I want to do is get some of this Vallejo model wash, and I'm going to use the blue-gray model wash. And I've put some in my palette, and I've thinned it about 50-50 with water. And then I'm going to use this sponge, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of this on the sponge, and it's going to soak up a whole bunch real quick. So I'm going to dab off a good bit of it on this paper towel, and then I'm just going to start lightly sponging it on to the armor. Now this will go on more opaque than it will look when it's dry. So what I do is I put a little on, and then I will use my hair dryer to dry it, and then I'll just evaluate it and look at what I think of it. And if I think I need to add more, I'll add more. And if I think it's good, I'll leave it alone. So let me add some, let me do the hair dryer here for just a moment, and then we'll take a look at it. Now right now it's at a point that when I hold it in the light a certain way, I can see the the effect, but I want it a little more obvious than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little more, just do another application, about the same way I did before. If you start getting bigger dots of it, bigger blobs of color than maybe you want, just take one side of the sponge, tamp it down a little bit, and that'll moderate it a little bit. It's a very workable process. You know, I've heard some modelers say you really can't use acrylics to weather models, but I would submit that you can. You just have to pay attention to the application technique. Now the effect is very subtle, but I like it. You can see the difference between this side where I applied it and this side where I've not. It just fades it out a little bit, adds a little bit more just variation to the surface, and just gives it a little bit of age. Now I deliberately put it on after the chipping because I knew it would do a little bit of tinting to the chipping and give it just a little more of a blue cast, which I wanted. And also keep in mind that when you're weathering models, it's not necessarily, I can't speak this morning, a linear process. By that I mean, on camera it's easier to demonstrate. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. But quite often what's going to look better, going to give you a better depth of finish, is if the steps don't necessarily go in lockstep order. So I could go back over this and do some more chipping to make the chipping look fresher. I could do some areas that have more faded paint. I could have done this under the chipping, then done the chipping, then done this again, then done more chipping over it. So there can be layers of staining and chipping and paint distress and all sorts of things going on that don't necessarily have to be in a specific order. You can just do them, add them, and as it develops, keep adding them and changing them and that kind of thing until you get the finish that you want. Now, any mechanical vehicle thingy is going to have fluid stains around it in various places, and those can be various colors. Generally, they're going to be something that's like black, something that's like brown, something that maybe has a reddish color to it, and it can represent fuel and oil and hydraulic fluid. And then because this is science fiction, we can always just get away with saying, well, that's future space fluid. So, you know, you can pretty much use any color you want. I mean, radiator fluid, it's green. So there's a lot of different colors that you could use. I'm just going to stick to two for now. I'm just going to use these game washes from Vallejo, the black wash and the umber wash. And all I'm going to do is just get my liner brush and get these, and just in various areas, just put in some extra wash and maybe a touch of a leak coming out of one place or another, just to represent where some oil has been spilled or leaked out of something, you know, where it's been splattered on the surface at some point, you know, because a military vehicle is going to get heavily used, and there's not always time to do proper cleaning. When you're in a combat situation, you want your vehicle serviceable and reliable, but you're usually not too worried about keeping it clean in terms of, you know, wiping it down and running it through the wash rack and the things that you would probably do when you were in garrison. So I'm just going to add some stains here and there, just around all the mechanicals, just looking for places that I think might have, you know, at some point, some kind of fluid leaking from it. And one of the things that I think is fun to do is if you can find an area where you can imagine that there would be some staining, some leaking, that would then drop down on something else. So like one of the things I plan to do is put some leak indications along here so that it looks like it's stuff leaking from up here and it's just left some staining and things like that. but there's plenty of little areas all over to do this. Also, one other thing to factor in, while these are going to dry matte, you can use a combination of matte and gloss, because gloss is going to represent fresher kinds of fluid and things like that. And you can use anything you want. I'm using these two acrylics, but you could use enamels, you could use oils, you could use other paints. There's so many products on the market, it's hard to cover them all. But just adding in some little stains and things like that will give it some additional life and just make it look like it's an actual used object. One other observation as I'm working along, I've put some water here on my palette. I'm just going to get some of this right there and really thin that down, because another thing you can do when you're doing these fluid stains is if you vary the opacity of the fluid stains and build it up and use different opacities of the color, it's just going to add realism to it. Now the base that I'm going to put this on is going to have a desert look to it, mainly because it's very easy to do one. But what I want to do is I want to add some desert-like dust and dirt around the lower part of the feet and the legs. Now for this, I'm going to use a combination of Vallejo's Model Wash Desert Dust and these VMS pigments. This color is light sand. And I'm going to start off by putting just some of these, some of the Model Wash on. And I'm just going to be stippling that on around the lower part of the feet to establish kind of a base layer of dust. And I'm just going to do this over everything. Now, these Model Washes, if you've watched my videos before, you've heard me say it, these Model Washes dry much less opaque than they go on. So if you've never used them, first time you use them, you may want to test them out on a test model or something like that, just to kind of see how they're going to behave, so you'll get an idea of what you need to do with them. But just build them up like this, just stippling it on, and then I'll come back and put some more on and then start adding in some pigments. Now I've mixed some of the pigments with some of the wash, and it just gives me this kind of paste like this. I'm going to put this on generally around the lower parts of the feet like this. Now, it's not going to have a lot of texture to it, but I'm okay with that because desert dust generally doesn't clump up like mud would. So not having a lot of texture is not really going to be a problem. Now, you're probably looking at this and going, whoa, that's kind of severe looking there. Yeah, it is. It is. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to clean my brush off in water. And then I'm just going to take water and start blending that around a little bit like this, moderating it a little bit. And then just occasionally repeating the process of going into the water. What I'm going to be left with is some really, really heavy dust. But I just keep knocking it back until I get it to the point that I want it. All right, and here you can see the 1 foot over here where I put that pigment on and dried it with the hairdryer and blended it in with water and all of that. And the other one where it's just the wash, you can see the difference. So that's what I was going for. Now I may go back in and put some more washes a little higher up on the legs just to get them a little dustier. And I even put some right up under here in places like that. But the idea is just keep building up the layers, then keep mixing it with water and blending it down and just going back and forth until you get the effect that you're looking for. Now, obviously, if you wanted something to look muddy, you would use darker colors, add more pigments, and just give it more texture. But this will work for me for a desert look. Now, my final step will be to take some of these Tamiya weathering powders, and they've got a little more substance, so they stick to the model better than just dry powders. But I'm going to use this one called Soot, and it's just a really great, quick way to add some staining to the ends of gun barrels, and I'm going to put some up here on the exhausts. Any place like that where there's exhausts or cordite staining or anything like that, it's a real quick and easy way to just stain that in. And then if you get a little more on than you want, you flip your Q-tip over, wipe off the excess, and get it dialed in just like you want. All right, I think I'm ready to call the Invictor Tactical Warsuit done. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I didn't go overboard on any of the techniques, I think. I just kept the finish fairly simple. But I achieved what I wanted, which is a pretty good looking little model, I think. I'm happy with it. I've never been one to say, you know, oh, it's got to be this super high standard. I'm about fun, and I had fun doing this, and this was my goal in this, was just have fun with it, and I really have. So if you've not tried a Warhammer 40K model, give them a shot. They've got lots of little details and character and plenty of opportunities for weathering and other things like that. They're just really cool little kits, so I highly recommend them. Now, as I talked about at the beginning of the video, I've been using this BenQ eReading lamp for the video, and I just wanted to give some final thoughts on it. I have really enjoyed using it. I really like it. It has given me some lighting that I needed on my videos that the two lights that I had just did not provide. Some from up here in the front, and that was sorely needed, so that has really worked well. I like the fact that I can dial in the light temperature. Here you can see, as I change the light, you can dial in the intensity of the light. You can go from very, very blue to a very yellowish light. So it's allowed me to match the temperature of the lights that I already had with this. So I really like that. You can also dial up and down the intensity of the light, how bright it is, regardless of the temperature you have it at. The neck lets me position it in a lot of different ways. It spreads the light very evenly. I've been really happy with using it. Now, I will say, I think as a sole source light for video work, it just wouldn't be enough. But you really got to find a really bright light that's diffused a lot to be able to use it as a sole source if you're doing video work. For model work, I think it could work. My eyes are getting older. I need more lights on the subject. So while I have used it quite often for close-in detail painting where I just have it right up under the light and it's sufficient for that, for general work, it would be a light that you would use in addition to others. But it works very well for that. Now, for reading and other purposes like that, if you had this at your desk for reading, over by your, like if I put it over by my recliner for reading in the evenings or things like that, it is perfect for that. It's really good. I've enjoyed using it for those purposes. It's good, solid construction, a heavy base. It's going to last a long time. The drawback, the one caveat that I have to point out is the cost. It's $229, which, if you're getting a really good light, if you're looking for a really good light source, that's, you're going to pay a little more. So I understand that. I know many modelers, though, are on a budget, and that would be possibly prohibitive in terms of getting it. But it is a super high quality light, super good, durable construction, and one that I can highly recommend to anybody who would want to use that. Thanks to BenQ for sending it to me and letting me just say my thoughts on it. There will be some links down below that they gave to me to add on here. So if you are interested, you can click on those links and check it out. Now, you know the rest of the deal. There's a subscribe button down over here. If you want to subscribe to this channel, I would be grateful. Give it a like, hit the little bell icon so you'll know when I have new videos out. And please drop a comment down below. I always like hearing from people. I also have links down below to my blog and to Patreon. If you would like to support the work that I do on Patreon, I would be most grateful for that. And if you're already a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for the support that you give to me and ultimately my family for this. It is a blessing to us. It is what makes it possible for me to do the things I do in videos, because otherwise we just couldn't afford it. We simply couldn't afford it if it weren't for your support. So thank you very much for being a patron and for coming along aside me and making these videos and this work that I do possible. And of course, to end up, I'll leave you with one final thought, as I always like to do. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.